Good evening. I ended the first video in this series by speaking on the subject of Brahman as the material cause and effect. The name of this series is Brahman and the Upanishads dealing with yoga philosophy. That's not the exact title, but basically that is the title. Actually, the exact title is a discourse on Brahman, the ultimate reality. So as I said, I ended the first video, which was just an introduction. As if you saw it, you know what I'm saying. And it was a bit detailed about what I would be going into in future videos. This is the second of those. Most of this information was written by myself in the last 48 hours. It's based on chapter 3 of my book that was produced at the end of 2023, called Atman, the Soul of Yoga. Chapter 3 is entitled Brahman. So tonight we'll be discussing Brahman in detail in this chapter. There may be 2 or 3 or maybe even 4 more videos on this subject. Brahman is a very important subject, being the creator that's mentioned in yoga philosophy. My name is James Exum, by the way. So as I said, I'll begin this second one with the Upanishadic yoga philosophy, speaking about Brahman, who is the ultimate all-encompassing reality. This discourse explores these ideas, drawing on classical texts and key passages I'm reading now, but I will be speaking openly here in a few minutes, clarifying the relationship between Brahman's apparent states and offering a summary for the student or seeker. In the Indian philosophy tradition, Brahman is the eternal, unchanging principle underlying all phenomena. The Upanishads and yoga philosophy characterize Brahman in paradoxical terms as both existence and non-existence. I mentioned I would be speaking of that this time, and I also mentioned I would be explaining that. It's a bit confusing if you're new to yoga philosophy. That existence and non-existence both are manifest and unmanifested, and finally they transcend all conceptual opposites. They transcend all conceptual opposites. This is yoga philosophy. It's a little deep for new viewers or non-yoga philosophy students. This discourse systematically presents these dimensions, exploring primary sources and authoritative commentaries, while also highlighting the practical and mystical implications for spiritual realization. Spiritualization is, of course, the ultimate goal of yoga practices and studies. When you take on yoga as a practice and a study, I'm talking about the knowledge side of yoga. I'm not talking about the physical side. That's asanas, that's the studios and the teacher and the mats and the poses and so forth. This is the intellectual side. This is the research side. This is the intense study side. This is the concentration and meditation side. This is the inner exploration aspect of yoga. This is not the day-to-day that you see in most videos. This is, it's very deep, it's very wide, and it's very rewarding. I've been studying yoga on and off for 52 years, and I'm a writer, as I said earlier in one of my videos, and I'm also someone that teaches on this subject, but generally in the past only to private individuals. I went public for the first time in July, and I believe this will be video number 12. So I've been public for less than a month now, or maybe a month and a week. I joined maybe a month and a week ago, but I've only made 12 videos. This will be the 12th video so far. So moving on in my discourse, Brahman can also be defined as the ineffable principle. Ineffable is an ancient word. It means unspeakable. In certain groups that have private meetings, such as the Masons and any occult or hidden group from the general public, where it's a fraternity that dates back some hundreds, some thousands of years, they like that term ineffable, which means the unspeakable principle. The name of God in certain religions is never to be spoken. The real name of God is never to be spoken. Alternatives to his name, or its name, as we say in yoga philosophy, it not being an insult, it meaning the ancient name given to Brahman by the early rishis, who were the wise men and the writers, and the yogis. I'm a yogi. It just means a person that's well versed in the principles of yoga, and a teacher sometimes, and a writer. So the ineffable principle is what I'm going to discuss next. And the Upanishads frequently emphasize Brahman's transcendence and all empirical categories as stated in the Tattva Upanishad. That's a slow pronunciation for you. Taittiriyaya is the name of the Upanishads. The Upanishads are a great deal of books. I think there's 108 that are still in existence, and still known, and still can be downloaded off the internet as PDFs. They came after the Vedic texts, which were 4 important ones, and they came after the Bhagavad Gita, which is basically the great book of yoga, and the Bhagavad Gita is a section that was extracted to become its own book, its own text, from the even greater book called the Mahabharata, which is the great book in yoga. That's history. I'm not going to go any deeper than that. You're welcome to look all of those up. Just go to Wikipedia, Yogapedia. They'll give you the rundown on all that. Brahman, since we can't really get into the principle of it because it's inevitable, we're not really supposed to talk about it. I talk about it rather freely. I'm not a practitioner of the Hindi yoga. I'm a practitioner of the yoga principles that fall under yoga philosophy. That's my specialty, and that's what I've been studying and dealing with over the last 52 years, as I said. Brahman is the substratum of all existence. In other words, if there has to be a foundation to the universe, something that was founded on, something that supports it still as a substratum, a lower level, so to speak, of all existence, that would be Brahman, which is God in yoga philosophy. He is the creator. Okay? The universe was manifested, the cosmos and the universe were manifested from his being. He defies definition, descriptions, and so forth. And now I'm going to quote to you here. Occasionally I'll borrow a quote from one of the Upanishads that I spoke of a moment ago. They're the great books that follow the Vedic 4 books, the 4 great books of the Vedas. And this one's called the Kena, Kena Upanishad. And here's a quote from it. This will be the first time, if you're new to my channel and new to yoga in general, that you will hear a quote from one of the great Upanishads. They are the source for most of yoga philosophy. Not all, but a lot, a great deal. And here's the quote, "That which cannot be expressed by speech, but by which speech is expressed, know that alone to be Brahman, to be the Creator, to be God, not what people here worship," unquote. And that's from the Kina Upanishads. And when you see quotes from these Upanishads, or even from the Vedas, you'll see a number behind it. It'll be like 1.5. That means the first chapter, the 5th verse, or the 5th sutra. Sometimes it's called a sutra. So that's where that quote came from, the Kina Upanishad, 1st chapter, 5th verse. The second quote from that same book, quote, "If you think you know Brahman well, you know only a little. The form of Brahman as known among gods and men, therefore Brahman must still be investigated." And that's the Kina Upanishad 11.3, 11th chapter, 3rd verse. And both of those might sound to the untrained and the uneducated ear a bit paradoxical as part of it. It could also sound a little mystical, a little mysterious, or in general, most people think, well, that's just very confusing to me. I've heard quotes from the Holy Bible and maybe from the Quran, or maybe from other holy books, scriptures. But that's leaving me out there. I wish this old man would get back to the subject and tell me what those two quotes mean. Well, that's why I'm here. This is my specialty. This is the path I have chosen. And so I'll gladly explain that to you, okay? That which cannot be, I'll go to the first one, that which cannot be expressed by speech. Well, that's what ineffable means, the unspoken, the unspeakable. Even in, say, the Christian religion or the Hebrew religion, no one can truly express what God is or where he came from or what he does during the course of his time. They can only quote scriptures to give you a general description of what's going on with the Creator. And this is what this means, that which cannot be expressed by speech. Man is limited, humans, men and women and children, are limited in our ability to create sentences and paragraphs that can adequately express the characteristics, the activities, the origins, and all the infinite variety that has to do with the description of God. We're only humans. There's a certain limit, there's a certain curtain between us and God, as there should be. As there should be. So that's what that means, cannot be expressed by speech. But by which speech is expressed? Well, we are made in the image of God. That's what the Hebrews say, and this is what the Hindus say, and this is what the yogis say. We're made in his image. And because we are made in his image, we use speech. I'm not saying God uses speech. He may just think speech, communicate just through thoughts. He may communicate just by smiling or frowning or any other way of dealing with the world. He may just, well, who am I to judge what he does? You'll excuse me, I have Parkinsonian disease, and sometimes my lips get too moist, so you'll excuse me. It'll also affect my voice every once in a while. Okay, so that's dealing with that one. And then the last part of that is know that alone to be Brahman, not what people here worship. What I've just explained to you is closer to a truer understanding of God from an old man that studied this for years and years and have read the Upanishads and has read the Vedas and interpreted them and had them interpreted to him by commentators from the ancient days that were truly, I won't say experts, but highly authoritative in their comments and their commentaries. So by absorbing all that knowledge from 3,000 and 4,000 years ago up to today, I've developed a mindset that's able to, in my own humble way, interpret these phrases for you, these quotes for you. So if you think you know Brahman well, that's the second one, you know only a little. This is why I said in one of my earlier videos that if someone walks up to you and says, "Oh, I'm enlightened," well, if they say they're enlightened, there's about a 99.44% chance they're not. And I gave the example, if you're a very wealthy man, you don't walk around telling everybody you meet at a mall or at a bar or, out clubbing or even on a college campus or at work in some large modern business that has to do with electronics or has to do with the internet. You don't walk up and say, "I'm a wealthy man." I mean, why would you have to say that? Wealth is its own proof. Intelligence is its own proof. And enlightenment should show in a man. He shouldn't have to discuss it, as I said. But I don't want to go too far with that. But that's my opinions on it. My opinion on it. Therefore, Brahman must still be investigated. Well, my entire 52 years of dealing with yoga philosophy, well, not quite 52 years. I started out as on the physical side, doing the poses and the exercises and even teaching that. But once I got into the philosophy and into the knowledge side of it, the intellectual side of it, I would say that's been a good 40 some odd years, at least. Well, that 40 some odd years has been investigating all the arcane knowledge, all the occult knowledge, all the occult in a positive way. It just means hidden. Occult can mean hidden. All the rare books that have to do with this subject. And all of them had one common denominator. There was one path there, one marga. Marga is another way of saying path. It's a Sanskrit word. And that was to not only find Brahman and understand him at the highest level that a human can understand him, but in the same pursuit to find myself, self-realization. Dr. Carl Jung called it individuation, but that's for another time. Well, that's enough on that subject, I think. And then we'll move on through my paper I've written. The next subheading I've written here is the paradoxical nature of Brahman, and I mentioned that earlier. It might be the title of this video. I haven't really zeroed in on what I'm going to call it yet. I usually do that after it's published online, and I go and put the title, and either myself or someone else puts in the descriptive information in that description box below the title. So, one thing that I can truly say about Brahman, and this whole paper is about Brahman, this whole series of videos is about Brahman, the creator, is that he is eternal and he's timeless. Now, eternal is a little bit different than infinite, finite and infinite. Eternal generally has to do with time. Infinity also has to do with time, but I'm not going to split hairs here, but that's just part of how I see it. He is timeless because he's outside of time. Before Brahman conceived of and manifested the cosmos and the universe, which includes all of us little humans here, and all of the decorations in my home, and all the flowers and the plants and the oceans and the clouds and the galaxies and the atomic level and the subatomic particles. None of that existed before Brahman. Those are his creations. That's why he is called the creator. Also, he is outside of space and time. So now you see what I mean about it's very hard to put Brahman in an empirical category, a truthful category, because there's so much we cannot even conceive of that has to do with his makeup and his existence. There's a quote in here also. And this quote I used in my last video, the first video, the introductory video on the subject of Brahman. This is number 2, the second video. I mentioned that I paraphrased this quote, and here it is. As a spider emits and retracts its web, quote, as a spider emits and retracts its web, as plants grow on earth, so from the imperishable, Brahman is imperishable. He is neither born nor dies. Just like your soul, the Atman, which is within you, which is on loan, it's a spark of the divinity within the human body, on loan from the Creator. It enters your body with the first breath, it leaves your body with the last breath of your life, and hopefully it returns to the Creator at that point. As a spider emits and retracts its web, as plants grow on earth, so from the imperishable arises this universe, talking about Brahman. And that's from an Upanishad called, it's a very long word, but there are a lot of long words in Hindi and Sanskrit. You'll get used to those the more you read and invest, that's a good word, and invest in the philosophy of yoga like I have. But that Upanishad that quote is from is called the Brihada Ranyaka Upanishad. And it's spelled Brdhadaranyaka. You will hear me spell for you in these videos, because if you turn on that part of the video that allows you the words to come on the screen, so you can hear what I'm saying and it'll spell it out at the same time, then my spelling will help you see that. And then if you want to stop it, write it down, research it, like I said, these are good ways to start. This is how I started, not using that technology. Oh my. Oh no, when I started there were just public libraries, and you had to have your library card up to date and make sure you brought your books back on time. And it was a totally different world. 1973 was a totally different world than it is today, as you well know. So now we'll move on. We'll go to existence and non-existence. This is another subheading. And one of the most enigmatic aspects is the attribution of both existence, which is called Sat, S-A-T, in Sanskrit, and non-existence, which is Asat, A-S-A-T. When you put A in front of certain Hindi words and certain Sanskrit words, it means the opposite, like done and undone. It's like it switches it around. It flips the coin. You're looking at the opposite side. So here's a quote here that will come from a new Upanishad for you. I'm giving you Upanishadic quotes because I want you to start looking into these books, because here is where the depth and the wealth of yoga philosophy is. I could talk to 1,000 years and not relate to you or reveal to you as much truth as just going through a few of these books, because that's where those are, I call them golden nuggets. That's where the true golden nuggets of wisdom lie, are within these texts, within these manuscripts. This one is the Chandogya Upanishad, Chandogya. Okay. And the quote I'm giving you from the Chandogya Upanishad is, "In the beginning, there was existence alone." Well, we just talked about sat meaning existence. So in another definition or another word you can use as a name for Brahman or God or the Creator is Sat, because he is pure existence. He is pure knowledge. He is pure bliss. And the phrase, Sanskrit phrase that involves all three of those is Sat Chit Ananda. Sat is existence, Chit is being, Ananda is, well, Sat is, in that phrase, is actually consciousness. Or maybe I'm not going to go there. I'm probably getting confused. I'm a little tired. It's late at night here in Austin, Texas. I've had a full day, I assure you. So I'm a little tired, so I don't want to take the chance of making a mistake at this point. So I'll get away from that. But you can look it up, Sat Chit Ananda. Existence, consciousness, bliss. That's what they mean. Existence, consciousness, bliss. Sat is existence, Chit is consciousness, Ananda is bliss. And that is another name for the Creator, for Brahman, Sat Chit Ananda. So I just told you about it. In the beginning there was existence alone, and one only. Well, if he's alone, there would only be one, so one only makes sense. Without a second. That's another name for Brahman. One only, without a second. And again, that's from the Chandogya Upanishad. That's chapter 6, verses 2.1. Okay? Chapter 6, 2.1. So it's a subverse. He who knows Brahman, quote, as non-existent becomes non-existent. Again, paradoxical, again, confusing to the untrained ear and the uneducated mind when it comes to the principles of yoga philosophy. He who knows Brahman as existence, him do they know as existent. Well, I'll let you ponder that one yourself. Why give away the store when you're only a visitor to my site? Once you've been here a few times, just look at my videos if you please. And if they bore you, please don't bother. But if you think you've found the right path by getting into yoga and the philosophy of yoga, like I know I found years and years, all those years ago, back in the mid-70s, then, as they say, the kids say, go for it. Because it's enriching. It gives you peace of mind. It gets rid of most of the stress in your life. It gives you a focal point. It gives you a path to follow for the rest of your life, as it has myself. Yes, it has, and it does, and shall. And that's from the Tati Raya Upanishad, 2nd chapter, point 6. And I made a comment here. Sometimes I put comments in my writings, especially in my books. My comment is, Brahman is not a thing among things. So that would be an insult to call Brahman a thing. It is not an insult. It's a respectful historical phrase as a name for Brahman. Brahman is not a thing, quote unquote, amongst things. Its existence is of an entirely different order. Of course, he's entirely different. The order of Brahman would be different than the order of anything else in the universe because he's unique. He's one without a second. He's the creator. We're merely just. I'm gonna go ahead and say it, and you might like this, you might not, but later on you'll run into a phrase in yoga philosophy called the play of Leela. It's also called the play of God, just like the Mahabharata is the song of God, the great song of God. These long words, these long titles have meanings behind them. They're not just there to influence other people or to, braggadociously come out with polysyllabic expressions to impress friends and enemies and whoever might be within earshot. It has nothing to do with that. It has to do with historical significance. Okay? It is historically significant. And I was going to talk about one other one here, but I see that I've struck through it 3 times with a dark pen, which means I don't want to bother you or myself with that tonight. So we'll move to the next one in the group, manifested and unmanifested states according to yoga philosophy. Well, remember, one of the first things I said in this paper was, he's here, but he's not here. That's a paraphrase. But manifested means into existence. Unmanifested means not yet becoming existent. And that's another thing that Brahman is. It's not a characteristic. He can't be characterized. And you're not even supposed to use the term giving him attributions. But being humans, we have to come up with something descriptive. So we do use attributes, whether we're supposed to or not. I mean, it's not written in stone. It's just the way it is when you're dealing with yoga, logic, yoga, philosophy, yoga, history. The unmanifested state of Brahman, and here's another one of those Sanskrit words, is called avayakya. Avayakta. Avayakta. I said kia, but these glasses and my tiredness sometimes make me see syllables that aren't there, especially being almost 75 years old. I'm going to make mistakes. I'm only human. Avayakta is the unmanifested state. And you notice the A at the beginning. The A means the opposite, not. Okay? So the unmanifested Brahman is pure, formless, potentiality. He's pure, formless potentiality. He's unmanifested. He hasn't come into manifestation yet. So when you're not manifested, you're something else. You're a formless potentiality. These are my words. The ground from which all phenomena shall arise. And I mentioned when he's manifested, he is the substratum. He's the basement foundation of all creation, all existing creation. There's another eternally unmanifested being, Avayakta, which pervades and sustains all things, yet is not destroyed when all things perish. Again, it's kind of, they're kind of playing with you when they say that. There's another. Well, there's only really one. I don't know why they phrase it that way, but I don't question the wisdom of the ancients. Just like 1,000 years now, I don't know if I would respect somebody questioning my pseudo-wisdom. But I don't have a lot of vanity, When I was young, I was rather vainglorious, but that is gone the same route my hair is gone. It's gone with the wind. So, to continue, there is another eternal unmanifested being, Avayakta, which pervades and sustains all things. Well, surely they're talking about Brahman there, the creator. Yet is not destroyed when all things perish. How can he be destroyed? He was not born, he shall not die. He's eternal. Eternal things cannot be destroyed, they cannot perish. And that's from the great book now. Now we've finally gotten to the great book, the Bhagavad Gita. B-H-A, there's several spellings of this. I go with the classical spelling. B-H-A-G-A-V-A-D, Bhagavad Gita, G-I-T-A. Sometimes once you get into yoga and you're, say, talking to friends or even students or giving an informal talk in public, you don't always have to say Bhagavad Gita. You can just say simply Gita, and that's acceptable. You don't always have to say the Holy Bible. Sometimes you just say the Bible. Not that there's a correlation there in exact meaning, because there's not. But you can use a casual term, Gita. I'm teaching, and I just want you to feel welcome here. I don't want you to feel overwhelmed, and I definitely don't want you to feel intimidated by my talks. But you have to remember, I'm not your average YouTube speaker on this subject. I'm a yogi, and I'm a yogic philosopher. I go beyond just a teaching. I go into my independent wisdom that I have put together for all the years through comparative research, all the comparisons I've made are the foundations of my work as a philosopher. So from the imperishable Brahman springs the universe, and Brahman alone do all things merged in. You keep saying to yourself, I can see now, or I think you might be saying this in your mind, why does he keep giving me these quotes? Well, what do all these quotes have to do with? They have to do with Brahman, and the subject of this video and these series of videos is introducing you to Brahman and making you familiar with your Creator. That's why. Nothing hidden, nothing secretive, nothing ominous. I'm just teaching. The last one is the manifest, and the manifest, you're going to know this word. You've heard me say it a few times already. It's the Vayakta, not the Avayakta. That's the unmanifested. But now we're going to the root word, well, the normal phrasing, Avayakta. Okay? And then you have the opposite, the unmanifested, Avayakta, and a spirit. Here's another name for the great spirit, the Para-Atman, the Creator. He's also known as Purusha. And in the ancient teachings, there are two great things in the universe that make up the universe. These are the highest categories, and then there's subdivisions all the way down to you and I and everything else that's in existence. There's Purusha, which is the spirit, and there's Prakriti, which is the energy. So you have substance and energy. In Einsteinian physics, it would be mass and energy, the old E equals mc squared. I'm trying to put it in relatable language for you. I know probably most of you don't follow Einstein, but he was one of my heroes as a child. So now we'll move on beyond that. So in the manifested state, the Vayakta, the manifested Brahman is the display of name, form, and phenomena. Well, we've given him several names as a display. We've given him a form. He's formless. And we know he's a phenomena. The first Satchitananda, the first existence, consciousness, bliss, which is the Creator, that existed one and with no other in the universe, and then projected himself into the cosmos, out, where it created the cosmos, of which we're all part, historically and physically. He was one only, without a second, if you remember my earlier words, my earlier quotes of words. So Purusha, and the three eternal entities. Of these, the manifest is the effect. When he manifests himself, that is the effect from the cause. He is the cause, and the manifestation is the effect. The unmanifested, that's when he's not manifested, then he is in the cause, as I just mentioned. I got ahead of myself there. And Purusha, which is his true state, neither manifested nor unmanifested, simply being, as Satchitananda, one without a second. Then Purusha is neither of those other two, that trilogy. And that comes from the Samkhya Karika, and that's the ninth. It says 9, so I would assume that's the ninth verse, ninth chapter. It's 9. That's the reference. Look it up yourself if you like. Samkhya, Karika, Karika. Now, if I remember correctly, that does not fall into either category, but I would say that it leans more towards one of the Vedic texts, which is not as well known as the four great ones. They call them the four biggies, as the kids say nowadays. Now we're getting ready to end this. In fact, we're on the last portion of this, I believe, or almost. So there again, we go back to the manifested state, which I just went over. I'm not going to bother being redundant, so I'm going to turn my page, and we're going to be closing down this. I use the phrase, I'm sort of from the 50s. I'm a kid from the 50s. An old man now, though. In the 50s, I was very much a kid. I was one of the very first generations whose family owned a television. In fact, my family I'm not bragging here, it's just a fact. My family owned the very first television in our whole neighborhood. And it wasn't because we were well-to-do, it's just my father was he just liked modern things, and electronics more especially. Mechanics was especially, but he loved electronics. And so, something new. Radio was becoming passe, and he heard about this new fangled device that had been out since, it was actually, I think, invented in the 20s and 30s, and then by a farmer came up with the idea, and you can look all that up. A farmer inventor came up with the concept, or maybe the fact that he did rows of crops, and he had to create those rows using plows and devices. Well, look it up. There's another story there altogether. I'm not going to get into that. But my father just loved anything modern. Doorbells, electronic garage doors openers. He just loved all that. Well, you have friends that are into modern technology. I've fallen into it myself. I just love modern technology. I was one of the very first people in my retirement community that had Windows 11. I was thinking about my Windows 11. They go, well, I've got Windows 8 or 10 or whatever they were using. I don't know what they were using. Don't really care. That was old school, old ways, over and done with. Been there, done that for me. So I went with the modern. Still am going with the modern. I'm a very modern man. I'm still learning, and intend to learn up to the last breath when my Atman leaves my body. I'm not just some old stuffed shirt. You may get the first impression, but impressions change with familiarity, as you will well learn. So now we're going to go down to the distinction and synthesis of manifested and unmanifested Brahmas. The Upanishads, and I'm just going to read this paragraph whole. I'm not going to ad-lib it. The Upanishads and yoga philosophy, because I wrote it, philosophy distinguish between Brahman in the manifested state expressed through the universal forms and experiences, and the unmanifested state, which is pure, undivided potential, as I said earlier, unmanifested potential. Yet the highest realization, as described in the Mandukya, These are other great texts, other great works. And the Brihadaranyaka Upanishad, which is one I quoted a moment ago, is that Brahman is not limited by either of those conditions. Through spiritual attainment, the sage, the yogic wise man. I've actually been called a sage by one of my friends here in town who happens to be a doctor. He's a doctor of psychology. I was put off a little bit the first time he called me, the only time he called me that. But that's his opinion, and I will never call myself that. But obviously he thought enough of me to say that, and he even said, not only do you talk the talk, but you walk the walk, which means I'm not a hypocrite, I'm not a fake yogi. This is who I am, this is my life, this is what I've chosen to be, and the way I live. That road I chose, as I spoke of earlier. Through spiritual attainment, the sage experiences Brahman as transcending both the silent fullness and the being of duality. I'll let you ponder that one. I'm not going to explain everything. Okay, then I'm going to quote one thing, speaking of scholars or sages, I'm going to quote one quote from a well-known sage in the area of yogic philosophy, and his name was Radha Krishnan, Radha / whatever that line's called, it leans forward / I call it. Krishnan writes, quote, "The ultimate reality, Brahman, is not being as we know, nor non-being as we conceive. It is the ground, the foundations I keep saying, of both, above all distinctions." And he wrote that in his book called Indian Philosophy. I think that's pretty much a good place to end, so I'm going to wrap it up with this. And I'm at 47 minutes, 20 seconds. I wanted to keep this under 20 minutes, but Lord, when you're teaching philosophy is not something that can be put in a 6-ounce cup, my friends, as you'll well learn through time. Philosophy is deep and wide, and the river of philosophy, I always say, is deep and wide, and it's also very long, because it runs from the beginning of yogic history, which was 4,000 to 8,000 BC, right through today's world and into the future world to come. It's an ongoing river of knowledge. So my comment on that was, the paradox is not a puzzle for the mind, these paradoxes I've mentioned so far and quoted, but a call to transcend the limits of thought and abide in the unity of Brahman. We are the brotherhood of Brahman, we yogis. We followers of yoga, the true followers of yoga, the knowledge of yoga. Well, and so are those that follow the physical. And I'm sure some of them are at our level because they follow both, but most are just, well, they're where they are and we are where we are. I'm not going to put anybody down or insult anyone. As long as you're on the path, all roads lead to Rome. All paths of yoga lead to moksha, liberation, reuniting with the Godhead, reuniting with Brahman, and becoming, because you reunite and you're reabsorbed into what projected you into the universe, your soul into the universe, then you too will join and become not just part of, but as much as, in a sense, Sat Chitananda, existence, consciousness, bliss. No worries, no problems. I won't call it paradise, but for lack of another phrase, I won't call it nirvana. I won't call it heaven. But you choose what you would call a state of being like that for eternity. You choose the name you want to place on that. I don't place a name on it. I just simply call it Satchitananda. So in conclusion, the Upanishads and yoga philosophy present Brahman as the unfathomable ground of all, described in paradoxical terms as both existing and non-existing, manifested and unmanifested, and finally as beyond all such opposites. Finally, the realization of Brahman is not the resolution of a logical contradiction, but the awakening to a mystery that lies beyond words. And there endeth the lesson. There endeth the video. So I'd like to close with these words. Thank you for coming first. And I hope I didn't bore you to tears. But here are my final words, my parting words. Be good to yourself, my friends, my new friends, my old friends. Be good to each other. And repeat those two phrases to all your friends, family, and even strangers. And who knows, in 10 years or so, we all may wake up and say, what a wonderful world we're in today. Goodbye to you.